Conheça a história incrível de um grupo de traders ingleses e saiba quanto eles lucraram com o maior crash da história do petróleo. Insights poderosos sobre determinação, paciência na negociação e estratégia nesse documentário exclusivo da Bloomberg Originals. Quer aprender sobre o mercado de criptomoedas de maneira correta? Entre em contato por mensagem e agende um treinamento exclusivo.
On April 20th, oil markets did something they never had before and they crashed, went into negative territory and closed the day at minus $40. Meanwhile, in a place called Thaden Boyce in Essex, a group of 9 traders, led by a guy called Cuddles, made $660 million over the course of a couple of hours.
The price of oil has collapsed to a record low.
We've never really seen anything like it.
WTI this morning down more than 35%.
People maybe wouldn't have been so surprised if the oil price had fallen to zero, but the oil price went to minus 38. It went far lower than anyone had expected. And so lots of people in the market were saying, well, hang on, something else is going on here.
A couple of months later, I started to get wind through a kind of network of sources that a tiny firm in the outskirts of London had made a huge amount of money that day and potentially had some part to play in what happened.
The information we got was that 9 traders at Vega Capital London had made in the region of $660 million in one day. As a group, I think they made as much money in one day as Apple makes from its international sales in one day. I mean, it's an insane sum of money.
Did they pull off a fantastic trade? Did they predict the way the market was moving and get it absolutely right? Or was there something else going on, and had they actually done something that breached market rules in a bid to sort of push the market? And that investigation is ongoing. So Paul Commons is a trader who cut his teeth in the pits in the 80s and 90s when everyone had a nickname. His was Cuddles. If you can imagine, that was a very sort of cutthroat type of world where people are doing, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollar trades by shouting at each other, giving hand signals and then sort of scrawling on scraps of paper.
The culture of the trading pits in London was very influenced by the working class guys who became traders there. They weren't like the city bankers that had gone before them. They weren't usually Oxford or Cambridge. They didn't wear Savile Row suits. They were ordinary working guys who happened to have a talent for trading. And a lot of them came from Essex.
I think it was 400 traders in the pits, and Cuddles in his oil and gas pit was described to us as amongst the top 3 amongst that, was very successful and made very large amounts of money as a young man. But inevitably mechanization and the arrival of electronic markets was the kind of death knell for the pits, and in 2005 the IPE closed down.
And when the pits shut down, a lot of the traders who worked there lost their jobs or quit or went to work for financial institutions. But Paul Commons decided to start his own trading collective out in Essex.
Some of them are ex-pit guys, cut from the same cloth as him. Lots of them are actually sort of in their 20s, and they're his, drinking buddy's son, or they're his own kids' friends from football. They're young lads, hungry and ambitious, and he brings them into the fold. And fairly shortly, he's got, maybe a dozen or so traders that they're independent, let's be clear, but they're all part of this collective.
Yeah, I'll let Liam deal with Essex.
I am from Essex, so I feel like I'm free to, to get into this.
Sweet, as they say.
If you were to ask someone in Britain how they would imagine a kind of Essex person, they would see someone who's maybe slightly flamboyant, with a sort of Cockney accent, a sort of Guy Ritchie style accent. Not afraid to splash the cash, but it's probably pretty bright and has done well for themselves.
Don't even make sense, does it?
But these guys, they drove around very nice Rolls Royces and Bentleys. They went to places like Marbella on holiday.
Thaden Boyce is a very wealthy place. You have to have considerable income to be able to afford to live in that village. It's a really nice place to live, and it's 20 minutes tube ride away from the city.
Earlier in the summer, we have this lead, which is that there's this tiny firm called Vega Capital London, and they were the biggest winners from the biggest oil crash in history. You know, anyone that covers markets is going to be surprised about that. You know, you're thinking your BPs of the world or your Glencores, but it's this tiny firm.
And one of the big challenges that we had was actually finding out who worked with Vega Capital. It wasn't immediately obvious, and at first we had absolutely no idea. If you go to the Vega Capital website, it says it's under construction. If you do basic online searching, it's very difficult to find anyone who's publicly connected to the company.
So inevitably, we're incredibly curious at this point. Like, who the hell are these people?
The more reporting we did, the more it became clear that this group were connected socially as well as professionally. They went to weddings together, they played golf together, they would go on holiday together. We found out that a number of them were members of the West Ham Supporters Club in London. A few of them started companies together, so you could see all the connections between them and start to see a distinct group emerging.
And it really just was this kind of shock that, you know, this wasn't just like a hedge fund or a firm you'd never heard of. This was actually a group of buddies who all had the same experience on this day and had all made a huge amount of money. So if you're an oil trader, there's a number of different ways you can trade, and probably the most popular is WTI futures contracts.
And it's basically a contract that says, I'm going to buy 1,000 barrels of oil from you at this point in the future, or I'm going to sell 1,000 barrels of oil to you at this point in the future.
It's actually just a financial contract to gamble on to predict whether oil is going to go up or down.
On the 20th of April in Essex, there had been signals for a while that this was going to be an exceptional day in oil markets. And we know that some of them arose early and started their trading in the early hours of the morning while it was still dark outside.
Essentially what they were doing is buying contracts that gave them an obligation to buy oil at whatever the price ended up at 2:30 p.m. So they're basically placing a bet that oil is going to fall throughout the day.
But they're simultaneously selling lots of oil as well. And whether they make a profit and how much profit they make is the difference between what they buy the oil for and what they sell the oil for. Now, of course, we now know throughout April 20th, the price dropped and dropped.
So this is going very well for them. You know, they are committed to selling oil at these prices, and the prices are continuing to fall, which means they're going to be able to offset it and buy oil at cheaper at the end of the day. Now, once it gets to kind of 1:30, 2 p.m, that's when things start to get really interesting. Suddenly there's a kind of influx of buyers and sellers, you know, as sort of desperation increases in the market and trading volumes go up. Now at 2:08 p.m. exactly, something bizarre and unprecedented happened, which is that oil passes into negative territory.
And it fell to a record level of minus $38.
We've never seen anything like it, period, in terms of the contraction of the global economy.
That huge gulf between what they were buying the oil for and what they were selling it for enabled them to make more money than they ever thought possible.
So their profit was the difference between minus 37 and all of these positive numbers on every contract they sold.
The price of crude briefly hit minus $37 a barrel. For one group of traders operating from a small office, it was a very, very profitable day.
It's important to remember this had never happened before in the history of oil trading. No one could have predicted it.
I can't think of another example of where you enter a trade and you get paid on both sides. You get paid both to sell and to buy. It's unthinkable.
One thing we know about the Cuddles Trading Arcade is that they were very comfortable taking large risks, and you have to be clear, this was a large risk.
Yeah, we spoke to oil traders, both people that know these guys and people that don't, and they all say that this is, incredibly risky.
And that's actually what stops a lot of oil traders doing trading like this. They simply aren't willing to stomach the risk. But Cuddles and his friends were.
So when the kind of final calculations came down, the group of the 9 most profitable traders made $660 million or thereabouts between them. I mean, if you can imagine, I think 3 or 4 of them made in excess of 100 million each.
One of the astonishing things about this trade is that 2 of the individuals who made more than $100 million in a single day were in their 20s. One of them was 22 years old. Only a few years earlier, he'd been posting on his social media about doing teenage stuff with his mates in town and going to see girls and rap music. And here he is a few years later making $100 million in a single day's trading. When me and Liam discovered that, we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. Oil trading is a zero-sum game. Anytime you're making money as an oil trader, someone else is losing it.
Amongst the biggest losers were the investors in this Chinese fund, Crude Oil Treasure Fund. There were thousands of them, and they lost everything.
Lots of people had put their savings into oil funds. They lost money that day. Big banks and brokers who sort of stand in the middle of trading parties, they lost money that day.
And another interesting thing is that oil-producing countries like Kuwait or Canada, they sell oil as an average of the WTI closing price over the preceding month. So the fact that one of those numbers in that average was minus 37 meant, if you can imagine, countries like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait potentially lost a couple of dollars on every single barrel of oil they sold that month.
Vega Capital's traders made such an extraordinary sum of money that it was inevitable there would be some scrutiny of what they did. But it wasn't just the sums of money they made. In the vital half an hour before the settlement price was set, they were by far the biggest sellers of oil futures in the market, which is an incredible thing to think about when you consider that the other participants in that oil market are going to be the world's biggest banks, oil majors BP and Shell, and here you have a group of 9 guys in Essex who are having this significant influence over a global market for oil.
I mean, I think you have to assume that if these guys had made $7 million or $10 million, they probably would be celebrating in Essex right now. But the fact that they made closer to $700 million has meant that they are facing understandable scrutiny.
We wrote individually to all the Vega traders who did exceptionally well that day, and we got a letter in response from a law firm representing the group. And the law firm was at pains to point out, number one, that they haven't been accused of any wrongdoing, that they all traded independently and separately, and they'd basically all made up their own minds that this was what was going to happen in oil markets based on publicly available knowledge, and decided to execute this trade.
What I love about these stories is there's a real variance of opinion, and some people will look at what happened and think that must be dodgy. They all traded at the end of the day, they all made a huge amount of money while all these people lost. That's shocking. But lots of people say these guys are at acute disadvantage. They're in a market that's inhabited by, huge technology-driven funds and firms and oil giants that have got all the advantages in the world, and when you get a bunch of Essex geezers who essentially beat the market and find a way to make a huge amount of money, they should get a pat on the back, really, because that's the dream. Since this happened, a lot of the guys have stopped trading the monthly settlements that they'd done so well at in the past. Several of them have set up new companies. They've essentially gone very quiet. Any kind of social media presence they had has kind of closed down. By all accounts, they're, waiting this out.
It's certainly too early to try and predict how the regulatory investigations are going to pan out. We just don't know. There's a number of potential outcomes for these guys. Potential punishments if there are any findings of manipulation against Vega or anyone affiliated with it. Might be you could be fined, you could be banned from trading, and in the most extreme cases there have even been criminal prosecutions in the past of people who have been found to have been manipulating the settlement and misconduct related to trade at settlement. There are other outcomes too. One obvious one is going to be that they're able to walk away from this life-changing trade with all the money that they made and celebrated as heroes in the trading community. That they'll go down as legends.